All right. Happy Thursday. I have a lot of things that I have to try and remember here because the day's different, the time's different. I've got weird names that I've got to try and pronounce. So we'll see if I can get this all right. But we're on live with another episode of Learning Tech Talks, where we're exploring the landscape of learning technology, cutting through the fluff, and getting your questions answered. Today, I am joined by Caspar Thykier, right? Did I get it?
I mean, it did
Oh,
take
my
10
word.
goes we were on air for you
It
to
did,
get
it
that, right?
did, it did, and I did have to ask, so I won't pretend like, yeah, no, I totally knew that just by looking at the spelling. And so he is the co-founder, and CEO of Zappar with an AR, which we're going to talk about that as well. And so we're going to be demystifying what augmented reality is, but really talking about really how that's more of a delivery mechanism than anything else, and what it means for us and some of the applications that we can use. So while you're at it, if you're just joining us live, go ahead, like the post, tag in somebody who would benefit from our conversation. And if you would, share with us where you are in the world today. So comment in and let us know. How about you, Caspar? Where are you?
Well, I'm in London. I've actually taken over my wife's office. So they're not my handbags, in case that's what was going to come in.
Those aren't your accessories? Okay.
I don't know. I mean, it might go. It sort of matches. I don't,
Hey,
but no.
go with it.
I'm at home at the moment. But yeah, in London.
Okay. All right. So I'm in Waukesha, Wisconsin, as always, the usual backdrop. And so the question today that has nothing, well, it kind of has something to do with what we're talking about here, but not immediately directly. And everybody who's watching, feel free to join in on this one. I'm curious your thoughts. But Caspar, let me know, what is your favorite thing about technology? And I'm actually really interested to hear this because you said you're a technophobe. So I'm actually really interested to hear what your favorite thing is.
I am a bit, and Chris, we were saying, I am. Well, I'm just like kryptonite to technology. I have an amazing ability to break stuff, and so I'm not the most technologically literate, which I guess is a bit strange given the field I'm in. But the thing, I have to say, I have a huge passion for music, and so for me, not surprisingly, there was a point at which, in that kind of sort of almost now in technological folklore, that moment when Steve Jobs did kind of come on stage and sort of introduce the iPod, you were just like, yes. And having been someone who loved the old, the Walkman was also, the Sony Walkman. I mean, the sports one, I mean, that was just a beautiful, beautiful thing. So I think everything about technology that has helped kind of the advancement of music, I'm a huge fan of. To the point where I'd say this is it. But there's one that I wish had succeeded, and for some reason hasn't, which is the the Bose glasses that they did that actually had, well, I guess they were called AR glasses, but they were brilliant because they allowed sort of music to be pumped whilst wearing your frames into your ears. And it was just golden because you could just walk around. You could have the peripheral vision. You could sort of be listening, but really be listening to music. So I say that.
That was your nirvana. You could have just been listening to your music all the time. Just people would have thought you were fully engaged, but really you're watching screens over here and you're listening to music right here. But I like it. Okay. I guess I missed those, which I'm surprised. Okay. Well, so in terms of, I don't know that it's favorite piece of technology for me, but like when I look at it, similar to kind of like what you said with music, right? The innovation that it brought. To me, the thing that's really interesting about technology is there's all these rules that we've had to follow for a long time. Like you have to do things this way because there were physical limitations to things, or there were, financial limitations, or all these different things. And you look at what technology is doing is it's just continuing to break those rules down. So the answer to, well, we can't do that is almost quickly becoming well, there is no situation in which you can actually ever say that. Like the possibilities are always there. So to me, that's exciting and terrifying, right? So if I were to say what's the most exciting and terrifying thing, I actually would probably answer, I would answer the same thing.
no, there's no doubt about that. I mean, and I guess that a lot of talk at the moment about, I don't know if you watched it, the Social Dilemma movie on Netflix, and it's a great piece, and I think, especially as parents, as we both are, you can't help but sort of see your children grow up and see just how they get put into that technology at a time in life that we didn't really have to go through, and I'm really glad that I didn't, because it's daunting, bewildering, frightening, and so there is certainly a dark underbelly to the technology that we're creating, that we need to.
I know.
It's hard, isn't it? Because the legislation just can't keep up, and I think it's a very tricky point now, where we're asking a lot of the CEOs of very big corporations to have to make decisions on behalf of all of us in a way that may not have a disconnect with what they need to do for their shareholders. That's
right. Yeah, and that's the thing about it, is it's just one of these things. I was talking with somebody the other day about it, and I promise this won't be the whole show, everybody, because we probably could spend the whole show talking just about this. But I think the thing with it is, you look at some of these things and the unintended consequences, right? Like Keith brought this up in the comments, right? Is that, it was intended for great things, to share stories and connect with people and all this. But like many of the Industrial Revolution stuff, we didn't necessarily always consider but what could go south with this? Like, how could this not go in a positive direction? And I think that's the part that really, with any technology, not just social media, you have to start looking at and going, okay, we designed it for this. This was the intent. This is how we plan on it being used.
Yeah.
But what if, what are we not?
Exactly. Wait a minute.
How could this possibly be used in a different way? So anyway, that is, again, a topic we could go on probably for a long time. And Scott let us know, just so you know, Bose did discontinue their AR project.
I know, and I'm heartbroken by it, because I saw that news and I was just like, I was partly like, what am I going to? Where's my version 2s now? Damn it.
That's funny. Okay, so let's get into Zappar, right? And we did talk about, right, there were lots of names that we had to kind of figure out here. So there's Thykier, there's Caspar, there's Zappar, despite all the different spellings. But let's get into it a little bit. I'm curious. First of all, first do this. Tell the story of the name, and then we can kind of get into what made you end up being like, you know what, this is a thing I want to do.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, the name thing, I guess we were saying, it's that thing, is when anyone starts a business and, you're there and you're like, we've got this idea, but what are we going to call ourselves? And it's 10 years ago now, so I can't remember all the awful
all the specifics. I won't quote you on it, although you were live with it.
Find the list. There are I'm doing that. And I guess, we sort of talked ourselves into this thing as, it should probably have AR in it, which again, in hindsight, you go, God, no, it didn't. And so I guess Zappar, or Zappar, depending on how you want to pronounce it, has the letters of being an app, the APP in the middle of Zappar, that allows you to use AR at the end of it to zap stuff. Scan things, and so you go, everything that we need to know about the business is beautifully contained in Zappar. Now, clearly,
we figured it out. We've solved all the problems.
We went home that day and thought, we can move on to the next challenge. So yeah, I think it's one of those names that still kind of holds itself.
You know what? It's timeless. It's like Google. Simple. Yeah, Google, Zappar. That is so okay. Now, one of the things you mentioned, though, that I think is an important thing to kind of highlight on this is, you said this was 10 years ago, right? And a lot of the things you hear about augmented reality, people are still talking about this as this new and emerging technology that is just coming out, and it's not. I mean, it's been around for a while. So I'm curious, 10 years ago or 10 plus years ago, what made you and your co-founders kind of go, you know what we should do? We should make an app that we can zap that does AR.
That's a good question. We keep asking ourselves that now. Well, I think there's two bits to it there. I mean, you're right. Look, it's a technology that's been around for decades. I mean, absolute decades. And I think the inflection point for us was where it made the leap from being something that could work well on desktop or laptops onto a mobile device. But, you know, even 10 years ago, and sort of 11, 12 years when Simon and Connell, who are two other co-founders at Zappar and absolutely the brains behind the operation, you know, they were working on this whilst at the University of Cambridge, and Simon was doing his PhD on fast object recognition on handheld devices. Yeah. I always say it's a very catchy title, really good PhD if anyone wants to read it. And then
I'll put that on my nighttime reading list.
Look it up. And then Connell, who was also at Cambridge with Simon, he built the, I guess, platform around Simon's algorithms, and they had it working on, you know, some really pretty simple phones back there. But there was this thing where you sort of went, okay, now there is the opportunity to use, you know, the device that has become this evolutionary appendage, this thing that we kind of can't live without, in order to scan the world potentially around us and receive other layered information on top of it. And so you sort of thought, that's interesting. I mean, that's genuinely interesting. You know, this kind of digital discovery channel. And of course, you know, and it's interesting. Everyone goes for film references. You're like, yeah, it'll be like Minority Report. It will all be, you know, all this sort of stuff. And oh, it's in Harry Potter, and the posters move, and the newspapers, and you kind of go, yeah, that's all really kind of interesting. Maybe take a while till we get there. So it definitely was a point, you know. So we're talking 2010, 11 here, and it was definitely a heavy lift then to go. We really need to educate people to what AR is, and we were kind of laughing before the show about, you know, the fact that you couldn't choose two more awkward words than augmented reality to try and get in. It's like, augmented what?
We'll call it that. And then everyone will just instinctively say, oh, I got it. Yeah, I get that. It's augmented reality. That makes perfect sense.
Perfect sense. Yeah, move on. So I guess a lot of time was spent kind of trying to educate people to what that meant. I think what's happened over time is that, you know, as we've introduced MR and VR and XR and, you know, AI and ML and all these other sort of acronyms that fit around engineering and computer vision. And so now it's about trying to educate people as to what AR isn't, because there's even more confusion about where it fits in that kind of complexity of really interesting different types of technology that are available and intersect and, you know, kind of separate. So, you know, I think there is still a job, you know. We've always sort of say that it's kind of a marathon rather than a sprint, you know, AR and where it's going. And I think that the last 10 years have been a really good way of laying some foundations. And, you know, hats off really to people like Snap and indeed, you know, Pokemon Go as well, because I think Snap was so smart in the way that they talked about being a camera company. You know, and they were talking about, you know, when they IPO'd, it was this thing of that's what we're doing. We're actually a camera company, and we're allowing people different ways of seeing through the camera and using technology because of it. And I think that is a much more interesting way of talking about AR to people who, you know, aren't familiar with it, because really what it is, and a lot of the work I guess we do as Zappar is about how do you give businesses a camera capability. You know, what does a brand look like? You know, how can they story tell with spatial computing, depending on what it is that they're trying to do? And so just gets it away from just talking about tech, because tech's obviously it's important that technology works.
Well, you need the tech to be able to do it, but that's not
it's not a reason in itself.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well, and it's interesting because when we were talking about this, the camera analogy, you know, or using that to help describe it, it is, and I think when people try and explain, well, what is augmented reality? You know, it's kind of just changing the way you see the world. If you think about it, it's technology is just it's changing the way you see the world, and that can be through a camera, it could be through wearable type gear. It can be that, but really, it's just changing the way you see the world and what you can see and what you can do within it. So it actually is, in some ways, it's more simplistic than we often make it out to be.
That's the thing, isn't it? The words make it feel super complicated. And actually, you know, it is how do we put a lens on a camera that can bring up different types of information? kind of what it is.
That's exactly it. So 10 years ago, right? And I remember 10 years ago, I was toying around with some of this stuff. We were using it. We were doing it for tours of campuses. We were doing it for student type stuff so that, again, you could actually experience things in a different way than you could, because we couldn't physically send someone to you, or we couldn't physically send a model to you, a 3D model to you. But now we could actually bring it to you and you could experience it through your phone. So I'm curious, how have you seen that, I mean, again, were there some use cases when you started Zappar as a team where you said, you know what, these are some things that we really think we can do better, and we think an app that allows you to zap will actually solve that?
Yeah. Well, I guess, actually 10 years ago, I mean, there weren't that many people doing it. I mean, Matteo was around, who did a brilliant job and got bought by Apple. Sort of Autonomy and Orasmo was sort of getting into the picture. Blipper was beginning to start. There was ourselves. There was Leia. There were a few. And interestingly, I always think about this, is it was quite a British and European technology at that time. When you look at, and a lot of the alumni, I guess, within computer vision came from Oxford and Cambridge. So there's one for Britain. And I guess when we started, we had the two thoughts really. One was actually there really isn't an existing platform that is good at sort of describing this content and allowing people to make AR experiences made for mobile, made for short form, on the go occasions. So we thought that's an opportunity. We could try and build that. And then it really was, there's a point when you start a business as well, where you're like, okay, who do we know? And what categories are we familiar with where we think there's an opportunity? And I guess we've done a lot of work around entertainment. So we had some interesting contacts within the sort of theatrical team within Warner Brothers. So we thought, that's interesting. When you've got content that people are already interested in, and there's a level of sort of fan engagement already, and there's other content that you could deliver around a movie or around an album release or whatever.
How could to the next level?
Exactly. So and once you sort of go there, you sort of go, well, actually, what does that mean for or print? Because that's also from a tech perspective, you're going, what are the things that are going to be easy to find in the camera image and track content to, that's going to have enough sort of points of interest that it means it's going to be a nice robust experience. Because we were talking about I guess it was the iPhone 3GS at that time, so it's kind of powerful, but they weren't where we are today.
No, nowhere near where we are today.
So we started there, and it's amazing how it just then the conversations evolve into different areas. It's because you then go, oh, well, what does that look like in retail? Well, that could be really interesting. What happens at sort of point of sale for that sort of thing? What does that mean for education? How could we do things for trying to make sort of seemingly difficult problems feel simple? Or and what does that mean in a learning environment? And by the way, within these, we also got some really crazy requests from people, that literally were from, I remember we had a student who wanted us to put a Zap code tattooed on their arm, and we were like, we want to get involved in that.
We prefer not to do that.
We did quite a lot of stuff in apparel, but then there was a company who went, yeah, we'd love to put that on underwear. We're like, no, that's not for us. So you do get that. I think there's an interesting thing about when people have that aha moment of what you could use the camera for with augmented reality, that they sort of go right out there. And it feels like everything should have AR. And the reality is that is not the case. You really have to think about the context. What is the right environment to have one of these experiences, and how well can you control that environment to make it a good experience? So,
you bring that up, and I'm going to pause you there because I told you I was going to do this, right? I want to pause you there because I think that is a really important kind of point to hit on, is the fact that you see this happen a lot, right? When newer technologies or people are exposed to new things, where the wheels just start turning, right? And all of a sudden we could do this. And what if we did this? And pretty soon you start pursuing the tech in front of the things you're actually trying to solve for, right? And it becomes almost and you mentioned it, right? Where people go, hey, we want to do an AR thing. And you go, well, okay, that's the wrong kind of pursuit to be having. The right pursuit is to be having is say, hey, we're trying to do this. Like to your point, we're trying to do this. We have this in place. We feel like there's opportunity to, again, take it to the next level, enhance, augment. See, I knew I'd find a way to throw it in there, right?
Yeah.
That experience in a positive way. Can you do that? And then you say, you know what? Actually, this is a kind of capability that would allow you to do that. Now you're solving a problem instead of saying, hey, look at this really shiny object. Let's think of all the possible ways we could use that.
That's right. And well, you hit the nail right on the head. And I think that's what's the lovely journey about the last 10 years is it started with that kind of, let's just tick the innovation box, let's do something cool in mobile. And I guess there's a whole, and it's still nice for those kind of surprise and delight experiences. But I think what's becoming much more, interesting is the fact that it's now being used more as a utility and for kind of, for information and instruction and, kind of contextual storytelling and sort of driving certain sorts of behaviors. And that's not to say that, kind of face filters and stuff aren't fun. They have their place, absolutely.
Right.
Wildly
it's a balancing act. It's a balancing act.
Yeah, but I think that sense of one of the areas we're very excited about is the whole area of connected packaging. This notion that actually brands across the world have this passive print on all the packs that exist, waiting to tell rich stories. Literally. That can be accessed by scanning them and brought beautifully to life with a capability like AR. And that can be, the fun promotional, here's our brand character coming to life, but it can also be more information about provenance or, kind of instructions or recipes or utility or, all those other things that actually people care about now that they know that they're making choices. So I think that's fascinating. And same in kind of, I guess, learning and development. It's just different ways to think about how you can deliver information in a way that is immersive and involving, and therefore more likely to be sticky. And there's lots of really interesting research around that we've been involved in about, I guess how AR can help memory recall. Scores very highly for visual attention. And therefore can decrease time to competency and sort of
well, let's dig into some of these use cases in a little bit because I think this is an important one because to your point of can you use them for this in packaging, right? Could I make my seltzer water have a really cool thing happen when I scan? I could, or I could have it do something a little more impactful to what I'm doing. And the same is true in learning and development. You can, make it so you could scan your e-learning and then a video plays in AR instead of on the screen. Kind of a wow factor, but is it really necessarily enhancing, improving what it is versus, hey, people are trying to do this. Why don't we have something here they can scan that then again, we'll give them some additional guidance or show them something that, helps them do it. I think we'll get into that, but I want to explain because sometimes what I find is I'm familiar with a lot of this tech because I've used it. Some people haven't. So let's talk like the workflow. We said there's an app and you zap and it uses AR. I'm going to throw that in as many times as possible.
I wish I'd never said it now.
Let's talk about a little bit of the workflow of what this actually looks like from kind of maybe on the design side of things, but then also, how is an end user actually interacting with this?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess it's probably best to start with a framework that we tend to use that I guess gets you to hopefully success in AR as a project.
That's the goal.
That's
a good goal.
It has very little to do with the technology, and we describe it as the five C's. So the first C of them is understanding that context. So clearly, as with any sort of business challenge, you've got to understand who your audience is. Importantly, in this case, actually, what devices are they using? Where are they when we're asking them to use this device, and how interested are they in the thing that they're looking at to begin with? Because those are some pretty fundamentals, but within those questions actually are some underlying tech things then to figure out about, okay, well, depending on their sort of socioeconomic mix or where they are geographically in the world, will have an impact on what kind of devices that they're using, what kind of plans they're on, which will affect how big that file size might be that you're creating, because they might be, downloading it over a network rather than Wi-Fi. So some interesting things there to kind of go, let's just frame and define who we're talking to, where we're talking to them, and what devices they're using.
Sure.
Then there's the second C, which is control. And that control piece is, you need to understand the thing that you're asking people to point their phone at. So whether that is, your, the can that you got on your desk, or if it's a poster, if it's a building, what is that thing that you're asking someone to look at? And then you've got to kind of think, you've got to really put yourselves in their shoes and go, what does that look like through your camera? Because everything's smaller. If you're going, oh, I want this amazing thing off my big billboard. Yeah, but through your camera, it's going to look tiny and look like ants moving around. So that thing that you thought might be impressive is going to be tiny. What's happening whilst I'm looking at that poster? What's the weather doing? I mean, are we asking people to look at this throughout the day? What will that feel like at nighttime and daylight? What's the acoustics doing? So do I have to have subtitles on screen because they may not be able to hear that so well?
They may be on a bus or a train or things like that.
Yeah, will people be walking in front of it to occlude it, and therefore make the experience kind of feel a bit janky because it's kind of the image has sort of gone out of frame, and how do we deal with those things? So all those environmental things you have to think about and go, how can I control that? And that's often hard because there's so many permutations between a person, their device, the environment, where they are. So you've got to really think about that. Then, I guess from a design perspective, there's the call to action. How are you telling people that this thing exists and they should do it? At some point, you need some real estate somewhere that has a mechanism for them to get to that experience through a native app, or I guess now through the web. So that needs some very clear and directional how to and why, because it's back to the thing, just because it exists doesn't mean people want to do it. What's the
it's interesting you say that. It's interesting you say that, because I remember in the early days when I was playing around with this, that was something that got overlooked very quickly. We'd spent all this time doing these really cool things, and nobody even knew it was there or how to do it, or that it even existed, and you kind of went, oh, whoops.
Super funny things about that, I think, is that and I remember this from when we started. Everyone was like, oh yeah, but we don't want to put a code or anything on it because you can just scan the image, right? You're like, yeah, you can scan the image. How does anyone know to scan the image?
How does anybody know that they need to scan the image?
Exactly. So you sort of go, you're gonna need to do that bit. So that one's super important. And thinking, again, that design perspective of how do you then incorporate that call to action into the rest of the, the packaging design or the poster design or whatever, that needs a good amount of thought, in a way that makes that compelling. Then the fourth C is obviously the content. That content, as you said, if it there are times when actually a video might do, I guess in that sort of learning context, if it is about a sort of disconnected workforce that haven't got access to a terminal and do want to learn, whenever they have time available, and actually to do that via a device, to scan it, to be able to get updated information without having to have lots of printed materials sent out everywhere all the time, that can be helpful. It's not the most, as you say, it's not the most, not what people do.
My use case where it doesn't work well is where I see, we have them going back to your point of like, who's our audience? Where are they? What are they doing? I've seen it where it's, we made an e-learning. So they're at their screen and they're looking at their screen, and then we're going to throw an AR on it and we're going to make them pull a video out, and you're going,
can't do that. No,
you're actually creating friction to the experience, because now you're stopping them and asking them to do something in addition when you could have just taken advantage of the fact you already had their captive attention.
1000%. I mean, I think that's got to be one of the litmus tests. It's like, if I could have got to this information quicker or easier using technology that I already understand and know, do that. because otherwise you've taken people through this thing.
List of things not to do with augmented reality.
Yeah, so that content piece obviously kind of key. And then the last C is actually communication, which is, again, having gone through all that, use all your other methods that exist that you already have available to you to let people know, because it takes time. This requires a bit of a behavior change about how we're interacting with things. And so we tend to find, so that tends to be quite an interesting framework to that design piece of going, well, how do I have to think about the story that I want to tell? And what are the things that I need to understand and think about in order to do this? And I guess it's then trying to, what's happening with the technology is clearly the way that you can author that and publish it and send it out there is just getting better and easier. And I'm not going to do a sell for Zappar here, but we're pretty good at that. So you kind of create that environment to make it.
What you do, right? I get it, right? And again, I love the fact you bring up the storytelling piece, because that's really what it boils down to, right? Is telling the story. And I think back to a long time ago when we did this, what we did, and one of the ways we used it was we said, all right, as we're doing this campus tour, what is the story we want to tell? And then how do we use this technology to help enhance that story? Because we know some of the characters in that story will not be there at the time, right? We can't guarantee that character will be there. We can use technology to make sure that character is always in the story. And so that as the student went through, they saw the badge and knew this is part of the story, and I'm going to get that content through the story. And again, it was all about telling compelling stories. And to your point, what technology did is it reduced the barriers of, well, we want to tell this story, but in order to do it, we need to make sure all these characters are here and that we have it all coordinated. And it was like, well, no, not with technology. We can capsulate that and then scale it.
Absolutely. I think it's a lovely use case, that as well. And I really do like the one that is for sort of those tours and events, and a way to kind of allow people to navigate a space and get other information and create their own journey. And that, again, it's we did a lovely piece with the John F. Kennedy Center in Washington around that, which was with their artist in residence, who was an incredible guy called Mo Willems. And he had a theatrical show that was on there around this just brilliant pigeon character that he's got. That's a children's book, and this pigeon is pretty renegade, but it was really lovely kind of building the family tour around the JFK with this pigeon who was trying to kind of tell you sort of the wrong facts about the Kennedy Reach Center, and it was just really nice the way that it came to life, and you kind of found these different points. And I think those things are lovely, but I guess it's just always kind of reminding ourselves that people are getting on with their lives. They're not waiting for AR. They're not waiting for the technology. So it has to fit in and be additive to the experience of what they're doing at that point. And I think your thing about friction is actually right. How can we reduce that? There are still certain things that you have to get people to go through. They've got to sort of scan, what they have to, it sounds like they have certain permissions. But as long as that experience at the end is delightful and the story adds up, and people kind of, I think that, you just want people to walk away with it, either having learned something or a smile, and then they can get on with the rest of their day.
And it's funny, Keith brought this up, and again, this is another one of those, right? We're starting to talk about as we start transferring some of this stuff into learning and development, but these are some of the use cases that I look at augmented reality for our industry, and whether you're talking about wearables, whether you're talking about mobile, the ability to provide support to people when they need it, if they need it, right? And again, going back to that friction point of, instead of treating people as though you're all an empty box, and so we're going to force you through the same experience because we can't do anything better. Instead, we can use augmented reality to say, hey, we know, going back to your point of who are they, what are they doing at that time, and what's that environment, we can say, well, some people at that time are going to need some additional support. And for those people, they can get that support right there. If they don't need it, so be it, right? They don't pull their phone out of their pocket and they don't get that information. But those who do, we've now created a seamless experience, versus, to your point earlier of, oh, I'm stuck. Now I need to go find a terminal. I need to go look something up, and then I can come back. To me, it really is helping us move. We're using buzzwords here, but moving learning into the flow of work is to me one of the biggest applications of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right.
So when it comes to this, I'm really curious on this from just, again, some additional use cases, because you've been all over the board. Are you seeing in learning and development, is that category starting to pick up on this, or are you seeing some trends in that space?
Yeah, very much so. And in fact, it's one of the areas where I think there is a huge amount of excitement. And I think the reason being that you've got sort of instructional designers who are trying to articulate important bits of information to normally large groups of people across an organization. It's quite a challenge.
It is.
And I guess this just adds another dimension to the way that you can try and tell those facts and stories, which, let's be honest, sometimes are really boring. I know of our own.
No, all this stuff is fascinating.
That's all the documents you have to have, and the onboarding, and here are all the things you've got to know because of health and safety, and so it's not because you suddenly have to make those fun, but I think in a way to try and at least make them less laborious and more engaging, so also people really understand the points that matter. And that could be, you might be doing, I don't know, an IT sort of overhaul, and you need to get that information out to people, and you don't want them to flood the call center, with questions, because actually if they've read the information you gave them, they should be able to figure it out, or just the onboarding exercise, especially in the time of COVID. How do you kind of tell people what your stance is on social distancing and washing hands and face coverings, and actually what's a way to visualize that, to kind of make sure that there's the right sort of memory recall. So I think those sorts of things become kind of interesting. We did one in the UK with Bupa for their some of the care homes, which is about how do you create and energize face-to-face sessions about fire safety, and how do you kind of begin to role play a bit in that, rather than just go, oh, there's a poster on the wall, no one's going to read it, but we've kind of done it. So I think I think we're seeing lots of those learning and development designers kind of really animated and really excited about the opportunity of how they can take their learning materials. And as you say, it's not like, right, now we have to apply it to everything, but where are
that's where it goes south, right? That's where it goes south, where it's like, we have all this stuff, what we should do? Let's just now dump it into this box over here, and I'm sure that'll fix it.
Absolutely, and that's exactly right, and that's totally the wrong way to go about it. And so I think and then there's other benefits, because you kind of I saw one of the comments pop about that sort of sort of process visualization and quick decision making. I've got a printer behind me here. How many people stand by the printer going, "How does the fucking thing work?" And you just want to go, like, where's the information to what the yellow does, how do I get it out? And you actually, to have a simple way to visualize that,
right,
there, rather than going, now I've got to find it on the computer and look it up, so I think those things are become really interesting. And how do you deploy that around an organization, and therefore just save people time and save
it goes back to that reducing friction, right? It goes back to that reducing friction, and to me that's and I think the steps, your 5 C's, are such an important step that's, and this is where, to me, it's always translated very well for our field, because you think about it and you go, that's really what our job is to do, is to say, what are people doing? How are they doing it? How should they be doing it? And what do we do to help shift that? Right? How do we put that point in place to get them to shift that behavior? And so this should be, at least, very natural for people in our field to be thinking about this. But what it does, and I think part of the reason it's exciting to me for our industry, is the fact that, going to your point of, it's another tool in the toolkit, right? It's not something that you can say, okay, guess what? Everything we do now is is AR. That would be a mistake. But to
awful.
say, you know what, we have some of these things, right? Some of these other things that we're doing. These are the tools we were limited to before. Going back to my introduction question, where it's like, well, we're bound by these rules. Well, guess what? There's a new tool in the arsenal that is not bound by those rules. Where we can say, well, how would we reach that person who's there? Before we would have said, well, hopefully they'll find the LMS on their mobile phone. Like, no. No, they will not. They will not. That is a lot of friction. You can reduce that friction through this. And I think the other thing that's been kind of interesting about, I've been talking to a fair amount of folks on this topic recently, is some of these, and I'm not going to call them emerging technologies because they're not, but these newer technologies for people, is the fact that for people who are in the design or instructional design space, in some regards, you can kind of leapfrog some of the barriers that you've had of being in this field, where it's been like, well, I don't have 20 years of experience designing, e-content or things like that. Well, guess what? Most people don't have 20 years of designing AR or VR experiences. So we've leveled the playing field. Welcome, everybody. We're all at the same gate, and you now have opportunity to set yourself apart from, instead of being behind, you can actually be at the forefront of it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think the other thing is that, and it's just true of technology generally, and it's very true of kind of the general dialogue around AR, is that everyone's always too wrapped up in what the next new leap is going to be, and what will the next kind of what's happening about 2 weeks time when the next iPhone comes out, and a LiDAR camera, and wouldn't that be awesome? And you go, that will be awesome. However, I still think that there's something about the beautiful simplicity of a lot of sort of AR experiences that are as worthy and as commendable as the things that are absolutely out there, cutting edge, bleeding edge stuff. And it's, I still find that, we'll show things that we literally made back in 2010, 2011. And there'll be people who will just go, that's amazing. It'll blow their mind. Exactly. But there's something just about, and that is that thing of, when it really connects is when it feels a bit like magic. And when you're so involved in it and it feels so kind of engaging that you just can't, you're just compelled to interact, and that doesn't require complexity at all, and that is open to everyone to be able to build. And I think that's the most exciting thing really is, don't be scared about where it's going. There's so much in the tank that's already been done, and to your point, it is a level playing field. I think the thing that needs most thought are the things, as we said, about outside of the technology. About, it is amazing what people do with their phones if you ask them to scan something, because they will do everything you don't want them to do. They will go up really close to it, so that the camera's not in focus, and go, why isn't it scanning? It's not scanning. And you go, yeah, but that's because you're literally on top of it. Come back a bit. Really interesting. I think
all their knowledge and experience with mobile phones just goes right out the window.
Right? And I think that's what's so exciting, I think, for all designers and developers. As you say, it's still nascent. The rules are being written, there are great case studies, lots of things that show empirically how it works. But there's just such a wealth of opportunity, and that's the exciting thing. I think that's why you kind of go, wow, this is still after 10 years fun to be.
Right, because it is, right? And I think that's what's funny, one of the things you said brought me back to part of the social dilemma, which we were talking about earlier, where they say, right, something like along the lines of like, the best technology is indistinguishable from magic, right? And it's like, it is. When you do this well, it is just like, wow, that's so incredible. But to your point, and I would say in my career, this has remained true in many instances, where some of the simplest things that I've done or my teams have done have been the most impactful, because we've actually stripped out the complexity. We've actually stripped out this stuff and said, and we're going to do this. And you go, why didn't we think of that, from the start, but we've over-engineered all this stuff. And when you actually just pare it back and go, what if we just did this? That's the thing that makes people go, holy moly, like this truly is revolutionary. And you're like, that was?
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
You're right. You always go.
I
Yeah.
guess it was. Okay, that's great. So one other thing that I want to, well, I have a lot of other things that I would love to sit and talk about, but we'll see how much we get through with the time we have. Is one of the things that I will say, and this is one thing that I've been impressed with what you've done with the technology, is there is this perception. I think a lot of people, and maybe it's just because AR sounds really futuristic and out there, that a lot of people have a perception like that it's super expensive and it requires all sort of infrastructure and it's all this kind of stuff. And so it almost feels just unattainable to a lot of people. I know I've talked to people and they feel like it's just too far for us to ever get to. How has Zappar helped break that down to say it doesn't have to be that way?
Yeah. Well, I guess there's a lovely phrase, being hoisted by your own petard, which I think is what we were when we came out and went, we're all about democratization. Because the minute you say you're all about democratization, you kind of need to make it affordable. So it's like,
yes.
So, look, that's been the thing is, how do you make this technology something that can be robust and scalable, efficient and affordable? And to do that, that's about going, let us try and take the complexity in terms of what's happening with, the buzzwords of scanning, detection and tracking and, all that kind of, all the compute, and just leave people with a kind of nice sort of, content visualization tool that allows them to make their experiences, wrap it up, and it all be able to be then distributed wherever they want it to be distributed. And so that's the bit that takes some time to figure out. And then you go, actually, once you've built that, it doesn't have to be expensive. The expense is in people's time to think clearly about what they want to achieve. And I think there's two barriers to AR. One, which is that wow moment. And then you've got the blank canvas, and then you go,
that's everywhere.
Yeah. But then you've got the blank canvas, and you're there going, what do I do? I don't know what to do. And you have to take a little bit of time to kind of understand this new space. So I think that the time is the expense is in time, not in cost, actually, of the tools or making the things. Because the other thing about AR is, and certainly with our platform, but it's true of others, is that you're taking assets that you're making for other things. You're either making them in Photoshop or Studio Max or Maya or whatever.
You're creating this stuff elsewhere. It already exists. You're not redoing it.
Exactly. So then it's just about, right, how are you bringing them in to tell that story, and publishing it out. So that bit really doesn't have to be expensive. And I think we say, you can make things expensive if you want to, but that's not going to be the thing that's going to be determinant of whether something is good or whether it works. That is just about how complex, how, where it tends to get expensive is if then you're doing versionings of it for, loads of different markets, or, you've made you'll probably have it from when you're doing the sort of tours and events or, around a campus. If you've got 40 places that you want to put different experiences in, they're all going to add up eventually, but so I think it's just about being smart. And I guess as with any business decision, it's going, what really is the budget that we need to spend on this for it to, have the right ROI for what we're trying to achieve. And then once you know that, then it's just going, great, what can we do within that framework? And it's, you can do a lot, is the truth. And the reason we made, so our content authoring platform is called ZapWorks. And then on top of ZapWorks, we have this concept called Universal AR, which also means that if you are used to working in Unity or 3JS or whatever, you can still work in those environments, but use our scanning, tracking, detection algorithms, etc. And so the reason, back to our democratization thing, was to go, we shouldn't just use that ourselves as a studio. We want any designer and developer to be able to use that so they can do it themselves. Because if we're the bottleneck, that's not democratization. And there'll be very competent people who can build experiences just as well,
who are perfectly capable of doing it, but they just So let me ask a follow-up question on that. So you've got is it ZapWorks? You said
ZapWorks, yeah.
Okay, right. And so that's where you almost the authoring tool, if you will, for these experiences. But for people who may be, you know, in the AR VR space already and they're using, as you said, Unity, things like that, then you become the basically scan mechanism, that operational supply chain of how that is carried out. But you have the capability to author and deploy, or you can say, hey, you already got it covered. That's fine. You can use this as a deployment.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And, and it was a really important step, that sort of universal AR piece this year, because we sort of went, we have two products within ZapWorks. One called ZapWorks Studio, which is for people who are, I guess, a bit more developed and, have coding ability, and it has sort of scripting and timelining and understands sort of, 3D space, etc. And then we have a simpler tool called ZapWorks Designer. And that is more drag and drop, for people like me, right? Who can use Canva or, whatever, but what I guess the universal AR means is brilliant. If you're steeped in Unity, and it's like, I really don't want to learn ZapWorks and ZapWorks Studio, I'm really perfectly happy using my Unity project. Well, there's a way to kind of then be able to use that within the framework to and importantly, I guess, build it once and deploy to many, so it can work across Android or in the web, etc. So,
the differentiation, I think, is also an important piece that you brought up, because again, not only is this so far off, it's expensive, it's way out there, but I think sometimes it's intimidating for people to think, well, I haven't designed AR before, right? I haven't done that. That sounds very complicated. It sounds very difficult to do. There's just no way I could ever learn how to do that, and you can, and it sounds like part of your authoring tool designed for those people to be like, we want to do AR, but I can't code and script, and I don't Unity. I didn't know that was a thing. Like, I have no idea what these people are talking about right now.
Yeah. Well, do you know what? It's a really exciting. I'm sure my fellow co-founders would kick me under the table if they were here now. But we've got quite an exciting update to the designer tool that will come later in the year, beginning of next year, which it kind of takes that thought on again in terms of how do we make sure that people who really aren't, they're not techies, they're not coders, but they are gifted designers, that they know how to do to be able to work with that. That's my daughter coming in.
Well, and it goes back to that democratization piece. And by the way, you got some kudos from somebody who's watching. Mark said the ZapWorks Studio is very intuitive, which I think that's good feedback from people who actually are doing the design work.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. These they are hard to build. There's no doubt about it. It's like it takes time and energy. But I guess what we are really lucky that we do have a really kind of vibrant community that's sort of stuck with us over the years, and it's because of their feedback that you kind of understand what works and what doesn't. So it's so easy to kind of get in your own little box. So it's a two-way street, that one, for sure.
So again, I think this goes back. Well, and again, I think this just goes back to I get asked a lot. What do you think? What skills should people have in the instructional design field, or things like that? And I think this is one of those things where you can say, hey, this is something that you can start to explore for your portfolio, is understanding how do you design some of this. And it doesn't need to be as overwhelming as you may think. And I think the other thing is, sometimes people feel like, well, this is a totally new territory for me. And it's really not. It's an application in a different way. It's a different set of tools that you're using to build, but the fundamental mindset, the frameworks, the approach that you take is very familiar.
Yeah, no, that's right. No, you're right. I mean, it's how do you, it does feel like it's sort of way out there, but it really isn't. We're kind of lucky enough that we also do a fair bit of work just in education. And one of the things that is really fun to do is, even at sort of K-12 and with kids that are sort of 9, 10, 11, who are kind of learning about computers for the first time and understanding more about sort of file structures and media types. And actually, you introduce them to something like the ZapWorks Designer tool, and you go, you know what, you're learning about Egypt. Make a poster about Egypt. Let's kind of get some images in there, some quotes and some pictures and some videos. And then, you get them to present it and scan it back. And, within not a very long, they've made a fully functioning AR poster,
Right.
they could take home. These things they're not, they aren't as sort of out there as you think, really.
No.
They're
Well,
in reach.
It's one of those things, and it goes back to, right, understanding kind of the fundamentals of it. And I think there's two things. One, understanding the fundamentals, which I think of the first time that I went into Adobe Flash, which it's retiring now, but right, I'll shed a little tear. But I think back to the first time you experienced a timeline, right, with layers, and you went, holy moly, like this just feels. But once you got the hang of it, suddenly you could pick up video editing tools, and you started going, okay. And then when Storyline came out, you started going, oh yeah, different tool set, maybe different buttons, different user experience. But for the most part, I just translate these skills and I start doing this thing in this different way. I think the other thing that, is really helpful for people is, you've mentioned this throughout, right? Sometimes the simplest things can be the most impactful. And I think sometimes people shoot themselves in the foot because they're like, we have to do the biggest, best, most perfect thing out of the gate. And it's like, no, you don't. Do something simple. I've always found that's the stuff that makes people go, wow, that was really cool. Like, can we do more? And then you experiment and you iterate. And you know what? Some of them will fail. You have the ones where you go, you know what? People are going to love this. It's going to be amazing. It's going to change their life. And nobody liked it. Nobody even cared. And you go, well, all right. Well, what can we learn from that?
Absolutely. Oh, look, it's often been said, isn't it? But you so learn more from your failures rather than your successes. That's life, and that's good. You're absolutely right. Keep it simple. Start small. All the truisms, they all work.
Yeah. You're here saying every single Zap that's ever been made was transformational for every situation.
Yeah. I mean,
no, it wasn't. Right? Like, no, it wasn't, and that's okay. It's about what you do with that moving forward.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, you know what? This has been an awesome conversation. Honestly, I would keep going, but my biggest fear is I'm going to start opening some more cans of worms, and then we're going to run out of time. And then everybody's going to be like, oh, shoot, I want to go. I got to go. So I'm going to close there because I think we hit on a ton of really important stuff, in terms of even just breaking down, understanding the technology, thinking about it very pragmatically. And, I think it's great that you've taken democratization of this capability to a different level of, accessibility to people. Because I do think it's important that we start to consider these kinds of things more than just, oh yeah, AR maybe someday because we can't afford the HoloLens. Like, and that's not all it is. Don't think about it in that limited capacity.
It's not necessarily, you don't have to start there.
Exactly. And is it pretty cool? It is. Gotta say, the HoloLens 2 is pretty cool. Awesome. Well, Caspar, this has been fantastic. Everybody who's been joining in, thanks for your comments, your inputs. Hopefully this was helpful for you understanding a little bit more about the tech and really what goes behind it. And we will see you at the usual time next week. Thanks for adjusting with me. And Caspar, thank you for being flexible and being able to make it today. This has been awesome. And we will see everyone next week.